algebra students? We're still in 3-3. We're doing example 2, and I have to just be very honest with you. This example is by far the hardest one for me to teach. Of everything we've done, and we've done some pretty hard things so far in chapter 3, teaching you how to identify an independent and dependent variable is by far the most difficult. So numerically, if we were given an equation, it'd be really easy to point out. The x is always your independent variable, and your y is always your dependent. Now, why is that? Well, you don't get your y value until and unless you plug in the x value. So do you see now the y really depends on what you plug in for the x. So that's why y is dependent. Your output always depends on what you put in, your input, okay? So x is independent, y is dependent. So, and I tried to sum it up here. The dependent variable depends on what is plugged in for the x value. So I did try to kind of sum that up. Why don't you either highlight that or box that in just so that it stands out on your page a little bit more as you're working through these problems. Now we're identifying the independent and dependent variables. This is a very difficult thing. I think a lot of the issue is you just don't have enough life experience to really understand and grasp some of these situations. But I'm going to help you through it. We'll talk it out, and I'll try and leave one for you to try by yourself, okay? All right, let's talk about A. In the winter, so it's cold. Remember the winter time, it's cold. So what do we do with our thermostat? Yeah, we warm it up. We don't want to be cold. Winter, the air outside is cold, so we want the air inside our house to be warm. So if the air inside of our house is a lot warmer than the air outside of our house because it's wintertime, we're using more electricity, okay? So they're telling you some situations here. They're saying more electricity is used when the temperature outside goes down. The colder it gets, the more electricity I use. I'm going to heat my house, right? That's using electricity, okay? And that's probably the biggest thing, all right? And then I use less when the temperature outside rises. So when it starts to go up, springtime's coming, it's not as cold outside, I don't need to keep my house as warm, okay? So you're tracking me on that. Summertime's the opposite. When it's really hot outside, I want it cooler inside, okay? And then as that temperature outside cools down, I don't need the temperature inside my house to be super, super cold anymore, okay? Same type of concept. So we got to find the independent and dependent variables. So remember, we're talking about amount of electricity and the temperature. Those are the two things that we're talking about. So amount of electricity used okay, and then the temperature outside. Not the temperature inside the house, the temperature outside the house. Okay, so that's why I specified it that way. All right, so does it sound right? I use more electricity the colder it gets. Yes, that's true. That's right. Okay, so think about it like this. What depends on what? Does the amount of electricity I use depend on what the temperature is outside? Or does the temperature outside depend on how much electricity I'm using inside my house? Only one of those actually sounds logical. Now, for some of you, they both sound equal, but they're not, okay? So I want to make sure I specify that too. If you do that strategy and that's not the best way for you to do that, don't do it that way. But for those of you that are like, oh, I heard it, I got it, do it that way. And just say it both ways, and the one that stands out is the one that you use. So the amount of electricity used inside your house depends on how cold it gets outside. You're going to use more electricity the colder it is. you're going to use less electricity the warmer it is, okay, in the wintertime. So amount of electricity depends, this is your dependent variable. And the temperature outside is your independent. Now numerically, I don't have anything that I can plug into, but we're just trying to use logic to figure it out, okay? If I just all of a sudden crank up the heat in my house, that isn't going to make the temperature outside of the house all of a sudden go down or go up. It's not. How I set my thermostat doesn't affect what's outside. But you know what does affect it? Whatever temperature it is outside determines what I'm doing on the inside of my house. So that the amount of electricity I use really depends on what that temperature is outside. And I'm going to adjust it accordingly to help me out. Okay? So let's go on to B. The cost of shipping a package is based on its weight. So we're comparing two things, cost and the weight of the package. Because the cost is based on how heavy that package is. Now, this is a little bit of a life experience. If you've never mailed a package before, this is what they do to you at the post office or at some of these carriers. They will weigh your box, and the heavier your box is, the more it costs. The heavier your box is, the more it costs. Okay? So let's take that statement and let's see if we can figure out what's dependent. Okay? So I walk in and I don't know how much it's going to cost. What do I have to do first? I got to see how much it weighs. The weight is going to be your independent. I have to know what that is first. That's independent. And as soon as I know what the weight is, then I know what the cost is. I won't know the cost until I know what the weight is. So the cost depends on how much that box weighs. Do you see how I rationalize that out? I hope it's making sense. I hope it's clicking. I'm telling you, it is hard for me to teach too. It's hard for you to learn. It's hard for me to teach. All right, now letter C, the faster Ron walks, the quicker he gets home. The faster Ron walks, the quicker he gets home. So faster is speed. And quicker is time. So study that relationship and see if you can figure out the relationship between his speed and his time. Which one's dependent, which one's independent. And I'll give that one to you as extra credit. Okay? So code word for this one is rain. It's so rainy today. So I chose the word rain as your code word. All right, thanks for listening. Bring your questions to class.